New producers, often they try to move too quickly. They don't allow enough time in pre-production. Thinking time is often compromised. If you're going off and you're budgeting and making plans, but you're not involving the director and taking the director on that journey, you can end up in quite a difficult position. No one should just think, oh, I've made it. I'm as good as I could be, because there's always more to learn. If you're a creative person, you think you want to work in the industry and be a producer or a director, whatever it is, it's not just films. Go to art galleries, go to museums, look at paintings, expose yourself to, culture.
Hello and welcome back to Season 2 of the Ajyal Show. Some people dream up stories, some bring cameras, but producers turn ideas into reality. Our guest today has had 2 decades of experience in film production. She began her career as a production coordinator in the Edge Picture Company. And 9 years ago, she moved to Doha and helped turn the Edge's Qatar branch into one of the busiest production houses in the country. From large commercials to intimate short films, she's the one steering the budget. She's the one making sure we're securing the permits. She's the one who keeps every department on track. So if you've ever wondered, what does a producer actually do? And how can I get into this industry? This episode is for you. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Bobby Clinton, to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And that's a wonderful introduction. So thank you. I think you should come and work for me later, because that's brilliant.
Thank you so much. I mean, a great person deserves a great introduction, right?
Thank you.
I'm actually quite curious to ask you a very crucial question. Is that as someone that's an outsider to the film industry, a lot of people always raving about directors. I'd like to know what was it about being a producer or production that really got you into it in the first place?
I had a moment when I was 11 years old where I would go to the cinema a lot. I watched a lot of television with my brother, saw a lot of films at the cinema with my parents, and I was really, really inspired. And I decided, aged 11, that I want to work in this industry. I didn't know what role, I didn't know how to get there. I was 11. And from that moment, I kind of plotted my way into it from, the early days of watching TV and typing out scripts while pressing pause, on the TV and typing on a typewriter, my mum's typewriter, sections of scripts, pressing pause, more typing, pressing pause, more typing, and going out into the garden and directing my brother round the garden. Poor guy, having to do all the parts for lots of films. He was younger than me. He's 2 years younger. I knew I wanted to be in the industry. And so from that point on, I kind of had to, go through school, go through education, decide to go to university to study film, finding out more and more and more about it. And, before I went to university, the internet didn't really exist much, it was 20 years ago. So I went to university and studied film and started learning what all the titles are and what all the job titles are and the roles and what you do in each one, and worked out pretty quickly that I wanted to become a producer. So it's kind of a moment of inspiration, aged 11. I watched a lot of TV.
So you said you went on to study film. Do you remember the moment that you so you started out as a production coordinator. Do you remember that experience? And do you remember like a aha moment, as in like, this is the role that I like out of all the ones that I've been exploring?
My first few experiences in production were in very, very, production coordinator and even more junior, intern, runner, this kind of thing. And I felt an excitement about the possibilities of what would come if I worked and worked and worked and worked my way up. But actually, those early years are quite grueling, you don't get thanked much, you work quite hard, the hours are quite long, and no one's really paying much attention to what you're doing. And as you go, job to job or year on year, you start, realizing that the little part of things that you're doing is having an impact and is having the involvement that you have is affecting things, is helping things move forward. I think right from before all of it, I kind of had this fixation on, if I do this and I keep going and I work really hard, I'll get there, and I'll get to be a producer one day, but it might be in 6 years or 8 years or something like that, but I was quite motivated just to keep going. So I think I was quite focused, really, looking back at quite a young age.
And to someone who maybe doesn't know what a producer does, how would you talk about, or how would you define the producer's role?
That's a great question. I have a quick answer and a longer answer. And my quick answer is that a producer is in charge of everything that happens behind the camera, and a director is in charge of everything that happens in front of the camera. And I think that's the quick answer for what a producer does. I think, it's having control and input into every element of the production, every element of the crew, deciding, being part of the decision-making team of who should we choose to be the director, who should we get to write this, who should we get to work on it, and then putting that team together each time for a different project and each time a bespoke team. And then from that point, in commercials, which is a lot of what I do, you have the client to deal with and you have the budget to deal with, and you have, your remit is bring in this project on time, on budget, and make sure your client is happy, and make sure your executive producer is happy, and make sure the creative director is happy. So I think that's the sort of short answer as to what a producer does. But really, they are the kind of person that's really kind of pulling all the strings and having real oversight over the production from A to Z, really.
That sounds like a lot of responsibility. So you started working with the Edge Picture Company in the UK. And then 9 years ago, you come here to open a new branch. My question is, what was the kind of like the purpose of actually coming to Qatar specifically and opening a branch over here?
It's a good question. I think I'd been working with the Edge for 9 years, and not during that period, they had started looking at the Middle East and, looking at opportunities, looking at where, what we could be producing in a different market. The Edge in the UK is working out of the UK, but for clients all over the world. So they were looking at it, and they were looking at Qatar and at the UAE and at Saudi Arabia. And they initially made a decision to open in the UAE, and then they made a decision to open in Qatar. And from the moment that we first opened, things really took off. We met some great clients, we had some great conversations, we started making some really powerful films, some really strong films. And from that moment on, your kind of reputation, it kind of speaks for you. So we were getting calls and inquiries and all of that kind of thing. And that was going on for a few years. And I sort of saw an opportunity that I'd been in the London office for 9 years, and I'd been doing some great work, and I was really happy with what I'd done. But I wanted a new challenge, and I wanted a new experience, and I liked the idea of being, living in another country. I grew up in another country. I didn't grow up in the UK. And so I was keen to try and see what else is out there, And I'd been to Qatar several times on shoots and kept going back and forth and back and forth. And then finally I went to the managing director and I said, I'd like to put myself forward to go there and, help. We had a couple of people in place, join them and help grow it and meet people and work with different clients and, help, bring it up to what it can be. So that was kind of why it all happened. And, I said, I'll go for a couple of years. We'll see. I'm not sure what I'll think of it. And 9 years later, I'm still there. I have a team of 20 people. We're doing some great work. Everyone's enjoying themselves and we have lots of plans for the future. So I'm glad I made that decision.
That's amazing. So my question to you is this. Maybe in the UK, you were used to kind of being on set and kind of having your very much, let's just call it the practical hat on set. But then when you were going to come all the way over here and you're going to be basically running this entire thing, do you remember that moment when you were like, I can do this. I am ready for this. And what do you think prepared you to kind of get to that point?
I think when I moved out here, I was initially a senior producer. Within a couple of years, I got promoted to head of production. And I think that and then from there, I'm now the general manager. I think it took a bit of time, a bit of experience. It took listening to people, take people's advice, meet people, listen to them, look at the difficulties, challenge yourself, but try to learn from everything. And you make mistakes along the way, but you try and grow from them rather than, worry too much about what could have been or that kind of thing. So I think I would say that I grew into it a little bit, because I didn't come out here necessarily with that in mind. I thought I'll go for a couple of years. I'm not sure what I think. If it doesn't work for me, I go back or go somewhere else. So I think it kind of grew on me, or I grew on it somehow. Yeah.
I loved the definition that you gave, like the quick answer definition of what a producer does, which is in charge of everything behind the camera. And consider me a noob with producing. What happens from the moment that you receive a project as a producer to kind of the final execution of the project itself?
Okay, great question. 101. So, the first thing is, there's two things. There's two things, because there's also producing short films with some of the directors that have come through the grants at DFI, and then there's producing commercials and documentaries and stuff that is more what the Edge has always done. And I think that it starts with the brief. The phone rings, you have a client with a brief, or a client that says, I need a film. I don't know what I want it to be about. I've got an event on this day or that day. Help me do it. But you either, you work with a director, you develop a treatment, you agree everything with a client, you budget it, you get it all signed off. You've got to make the timings work, the budget work, the creative work. Once it's all agreed, you move into pre-production. And at that point, if you haven't done it yet, it's selecting the right crew, the right heads of department, the right camera team, the director, and choosing the right people to work on that kind of project. A lot of logistics, a lot of which is done by, in my case, my production managers, production assistants, sorting out the timings and the planning and the agreements on people's rates and all of that kind of thing. And that period of pre-production can range from 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on what the production is. And then you move to the shoot. A lot of planning, call sheets, risk assessments, location recce's, castings. All of these things have got to happen during that pre-production. And then if you've done everything right and the pre-production period has been done really well, then the shoot should go really smoothly. And there shouldn't be any surprises, and it should go exactly like you planned it. And then you move to post-production. Now, of course, things don't always work like that. Sometimes, surprises happen. It can range from anything. An actor is late, or someone changes their mind about something. There's something happening with the weather. I mean, maybe less so here than in the UK when we have a lot of rain delays. And there's a lot of small to large problems that can happen. And, as a producer, your job is to fix those problems and solve them. Not single-handedly, with your production team or with the crew member that it might involve. And then from there, you finish the shoot, which, as shoots can be usually long, usually tough. It could be a day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, or whatever it is. And then you finish the shoot and you go on and, you go home, go to bed. And then you move into post-production. And then that whole process starts. And I think it's always really great when you finish a shoot, because you feel, hopefully you've got everything. You're excited about the rushes, excited for the next stage. But it's also a little bit sad, because you've bonded with your crew for those days and you've kind of been like a family together, having I'm going to say fun time, but tough time, fun time, but, kind of united. So when it's all over, it can be a bit sad, actually, when you go home and you think, oh, done it now. Next problem, next stage, post-production. But I think it's so important working with the right people and working with people that you've had good experiences with and who offer great creative solutions and and logistical solutions, and you know, because the team matters more than anything, I think.
Yeah.
You know,
a part of like something that I've heard a lot with different department heads in film sets is that there's always like this like communication with the director. And you mentioned that after the brief, like you sit with the director to kind of understand what it is. So I'm curious to know, in that meeting or like in that like huddle, let's call it, what are the type of questions that a producer asks the director to make sure that what's happening behind the camera is also helping make sure what's happening in front of the camera is going the way that it should be?
I think the most important thing is that what the director's written in their treatment matches what you've allowed for in the budget. You know, you read a treatment and it has to be interpreted, and you need to be checking with the director, you know, asking them, how many days do you think it's going to take to shoot this? You know, what kind of camera do you want? What kind of camera crew? And things that really affect the decisions you make and take forward. And I think that process has to be really intertwined, because if you're, as a producer, if you're going off and you're budgeting and making plans, but you're not involving the director and taking the director on that journey, you can end up in quite a difficult position, because what they have in mind and what you have in mind might be different. So I think being aligned and working really closely together and involving them in some key decisions, you know, we can't afford this steady cam, but we can afford that, or we can do this, but not that. You've got to have them, they've got to be on board.
Yeah.
And I've been on sets as a young, you know, production assistant, production manager in the UK, where people are not aligned, and it doesn't ultimately work. And you get the film, but it's not brilliant, and you can see that on the screen somehow. And I think that's why this pre-production, these conversations are so important.
When a lot of people think of like the practical side of things, like immediately like we're inclined to think that, oh, like this isn't like creative, and like, you know, people are kind of scared of it from that sense. And given the fact that you've mentioned like a lot about like budget and what can be doable and not doable, how do you balance kind of that level of creative ambition with like maybe financial limitations that might need to be taken account for?
As a producer and, you know, also as a filmmaker, you want to push the creative to the maximum. You know, you want the money to be visible on the screen. You want it to see it. You want to have as many, you know, all the tools, all the cast. You want as much as possible to appear on screen. But yeah, as I said, you have to be realistic. I think ultimately, you know, good negotiating skills, you know, when you work with crew a lot, you can maybe get a special deal here and there, or get somebody to help out on something, put a little bit more resources on something than you've got. But yeah, it's a balancing act. It's a tricky balancing act, and because often there's not quite enough budget for something, but we're always really ambitious about what we want to achieve, and we want it to be the best it can be. You know, I don't accept, you know, I want my films to be as great as they can be. You know, we want to win awards. We want people to be happy. We want to push all the kind of push the envelope a bit. But yeah, it's just a very difficult balancing act. And also, when it comes to sort of technical crew and camera crew and stuff, you want to keep everyone motivated, and often it's creative that motivates people. So you've got to be careful not to kill their ambitions by just being too much of a realist. Yeah.
I remember like a while ago you said that sometimes like maybe like let's say someone might be late, or like there's like a weather mishap, or how as a producer do you kind of plan for things that you're not sure might happen, if that makes sense? Like I don't know, I can't seem to visualize it. So I'm curious to know how does a producer do that?
I think it comes with experience, because, you know, when I was starting out, I didn't always have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. But you go through various experiences where things do go wrong or not quite as well as they could have. And you start, I don't know, I'm going to say catastrophizing, but you start planning kind of for all these eventualities. And it's interesting actually, because I've been on a lot of shoots, you know, my shoots where I'm the producer, something happens and I can see my production managers coming a mile away, and their faces, I know something's happened. And I go, I need to talk to you. And you go, well, what is it? And they go, well, it's blah, 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 blah. And I go, right, okay, we're just going to do X. And they go, how did you know already? How did you know what to do? I was like, because I've been through this before. You know, I've enough experience to already know what to do when something doesn't go right. And they're always amazed. And I say to them, don't worry, one day you'll be able to do that. It's just time and experience. You know, I've been doing this for nearly 20 years in some form or another. And I got used to all the things that, you know, that were surprising and shocking and difficult when I was, you know, in my mid-20s. Yeah.
Do you have like a particular, maybe like set moment that kind of like you come back to when you think of like maybe like something gone wrong and then having to solve that?
Do you know what? I have so many, and I'm just trying to think of what example to give. I've just shot a film in February, Abu Fanus, with two co-directors, Amira Abu Jabara and Horia El Haddad. And we did a 4-day shoot, 3 overnights and 1 daytime. And we have very excited about the film. It's in post-production at this moment. We have an older actor playing one of the main roles. And he was obviously booked by us for the whole shoot, and it was planned well in advance, et cetera, et cetera. And on the second day, he said, oh, yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to come tomorrow. We said, what is that now? Oh, well, I've actually taken another booking to be in another shoot for something else tomorrow. I said, right, well, that's going to be a little bit of a problem for us because we're filming, you know, in Umbab at night with 25 crew and it's all arranged. Yeah, sorry about that. You know, I'll see what I can do. So, you know, we talked a lot with him and a lot of persuading. It was a bit tricky because he agreed something that he perhaps shouldn't have agreed. But, you know, he's an older gentleman. And in the end, you know, we put a car with a driver in it outside his venue where he was filming the other thing. And we had somebody kind of go in as soon as it was done and kindly escort him in the car and then straight up to Umbab, which, you know, it's a 2-hour drive, and brought him to the set, rescheduled that entire filming night to put his shots later so that we could do the other stuff first, replanned quite a lot of things. But, you know, it was, you know, my production team were, you know, very diligent. They got him there, you know, and so problem solved. A lot of stress. Didn't tell the directors any of this, didn't want to worry them. These kind of things happen and you just sort of get on with it. And it works, you know. I kind of thought, hopefully it'll work. Hopefully he'll turn up. I've had numerous things happen over the years, from losing locations when you're about to get there, or even being in a location and somebody changed their mind about you being allowed to film there and having to then find a new location midway through filming a scene that looks almost the same and have to relocate like all the crew over there. So all sorts of sort of things, but you know, you learn from them all. You kind of a little bit prepared, you know, the next time. I mean, we had a film commercial a couple of years ago, and the lead actress, an older lady, had to, in the scene, go down an escalator. She didn't tell us she had a fear of escalators. She didn't say, I've got a problem with that. We didn't ask, because who asks in a casting, oh, are you okay with escalators? So, you know, we changed the shot. She didn't have to go down it. She could stand at the top of it, or, you know. So these funny little things happen that you're just not expecting. I had a big commercial when I first, you know, quite a while ago, 9 years ago, with a Bedouin tent set up in the Inland Sea area. A big shoot, 50 crew, overnight shoot. In fact, it was 2 weeks of filming. But on this particular night, we had a Bedouin tent scene, and we'd hired the actors and the extras and the set and the campfire, and everything was set up. And the actor from the agency who had accepted the part of the gentleman who was going to pour the coffee decided he didn't want to pour the coffee anymore because he didn't feel that fitted his position and his stature in life. So he said, I'm happy to play the part of the owner of the Bedouin tent, but I will not pour the coffee at the Bedouin tent. So it was about 1 hour of convincing him to try to just pour the coffee, which is what it says on the casting sheet. And his agent really saying, no, you're very rude, you've offended him and all of this. After an hour, we found another man, who said, I'll do it. So he poured the coffee and the other man did this. And, you sort of work around it. Yeah. But it was kind of stressful when you've got 50 crew and everyone's on the clock and you're trying to convince someone to do the thing that they were hired to do. So, yeah.
I mean, I think from that moment till now, I'm guessing you ask about the escalators at every casting call now.
Ask about the escalators, and it also make sure if you're hiring an actor and they need to drive a car in a scene, make sure they've got a driving license. Yeah. Because several times I've hired actors and no one's asked that question and they can't drive a car. And I've had to pay for somebody to go and do a very, very quick test to enable them to have the license in time for the shoot.
One of the roles that you said that the producer does after kind of meeting with the director is also kind of having input and kind of helping with choosing the crew that's going to be there. What does that process look like for a producer? How do you decide who's the right person to be on the set for the particular project?
Good question. When it depends on what the role is. So for the DOP, the cameraman, I would always let the director decide, because it needs to be someone that they have worked with before and feel comfortable with. And then the DOP chooses their team. They choose their focus puller, their AC, and so on and so forth. The DOP chooses the gaffer chooses the sparks. So those kind of roles, I do it that way around. Now, I have on occasion had a situation in the UK where the director wants to use a DOP that for whatever reason I might not think is the right person for that, and I might explain that to them, and then they say, could you think of someone else you think might be able to do it? That kind of thing. I think when I'm working with first-time directors, as I do quite a lot in short film projects, they don't tend to have those existing relationships. So I would then offer up who I think would be the right crew and right heads of department, and often try to choose people that have worked with first-time directors before, that understand, if they don't live here in Qatar, maybe people that have been here, that have worked on shoots, that kind of understand a little bit about it, because, some of the conditions can be quite tough, the heat, if you're not used to it. So it depends a little bit, but ultimately, you want to make sure that the crew are a good crew, they gel well, they get on with each other, because if you choose one person in that group that isn't the right person, it can really upset the kind of feeling on a shoot. So I think it's really important, right down to from senior to the most junior. Yeah.
You mentioned that maybe sometimes there might be, like, let's say a DOP that's maybe overseas that maybe the director wants. As a producer, and you're already thinking about the budget and all these things, how do you decide when it's the right time to kind of maybe use resources externally? Because I'm guessing that's probably going to cost much more than it would to hire someone local.
I think it really is about, you look at all the options and the value of those different people and what they bring to the production. And I think you have to weigh up the options in front of you and sometimes decide, I need to take this option, which is more expensive, but it's going to be worth it in the long run for, certain reasons. So it's a tough decision. I mean, I'm in favor of trying to work as much as possible with people here who live here and who understand what it's like here and who are part of the industry here. But sometimes it's good to bring in someone different. For this film, Abu Fanous, that we've just shot, we had a DP who came from Hawaii. So I don't think you could get further away than Hawaii. When we had all the PPMs and different meetings, he's literally in a 12-hour different time zone. But, he's someone that one of the directors had worked with before and was keen to be part of the project. So, he did a nice deal for us to be able to come.
Another thing as well that you mentioned, and part of the roles of like the producer, is kind of this idea of scheduling. Now, again, I might sound like a complete beginner, but like, what is it that you schedule exactly? Like, I mean, of course, there's like people think of scheduling something in a shoot, you're thinking of, okay, when we're going to go film and then when we're going to end. But is there more to it than just that?
There's quite a lot more to it, actually. I think I tend to work backwards. So you look at it, you look at a calendar and you go, when do we need to have this film done by? When's it going to launch, or when's the event? And then you work backwards from that point in time to, where you are there. And it starts with, kicking off the project, initial conversations, concepts, storyboards. But, and then you move from there to, storyboards and scripts, through to briefing. If it's a creative project, you've got to brief all the different departments. You've got to brief art department, brief the stylist, brief the unit department. So all the briefings go into the schedule, and all of the pre-production time that each department needs to do the work that they need to do before the shoot needs to be scheduled. And then if you're working on a commercial and you have clients and agency and so on, you need to put all the milestones in for when they're going to look at everything. So you're briefing the art department, the stylist, but then they need to provide mood boards, and the mood boards need to be looked at by the director and the producer and the executive producer, and then they need to go to the client. So there's really a lot of layers to each department, and each department's got its schedule, and it all gets put into one, master. So it can actually become very, very detailed and kind of milestone orientated. But if you do that, thoroughly in advance and you stick to it, it just ultimately makes the production run smoother.
Do you have like a master checklist? Because I'm guessing it sounds like it's a lot of different layers. So is there like a master producer's checklist that you have where you're like, okay, like tick, tick, or is it kind of varies from project to project?
I think it varies project to project and varies producer to producer. I probably do have one. I think it's in my head, so I'm not sure I've ever written it down. But I think when I'm often, at the Edge, we really believe in developing people and growing people. So a lot of people start their careers with us, and so there's a checklist, I think, and there's an order to how I do things, but it might be slightly different to the next person, and neither way is right or wrong. It's just each of its, each producer's different.
Given we were talking about like different producers, let's talk about like new producers. Like based on how deep you've been into this industry, what are some of like the common pitfalls that you see like new producers make, that maybe now after the experience that you've had for such a long period of time in the industry, that you kind of were like, okay, like I see this is kind of like a pattern?
I think new producers often don't allow themselves enough time. So they try to move too quickly. They don't allow enough time in pre-production, enough creative time, and thinking time. Thinking time is often compromised. And it comes with experience. You start realizing how much time you need to do something. And new producers often, they fall into that quite a lot, not giving themselves enough time, not realizing quite how long something's going to take, and taking away their opportunities to change the plan or change their mind or change something. So I think time is one. I think when we talked about master schedule, and I'm talking about, might have a 3-month or a 4-month or a 3-week schedule for a whole production. But there's also shoot schedule, which is just per day. And new producers often think they can get through it faster than they can. So they don't allow enough time per shot or per setup or for each location move. And I look at a lot of shoot schedules. People run them past me, and I go, "There's no way you're going to do these 3 scenes in this much time. You need to stretch it out or think of how to do it differently." So I think, it's all time related. Actually, now I say it, yeah.
So for let's talk about new producers in Qatar, or let's say the production industry in Qatar. When you think about that industry, do you feel like there's any maybe gaps in, like, let's say, because we talked a lot about kind of talents and actors that, or castings that you've had here. Do you feel like there's gaps in kind of like the local talent pipeline here?
I think there used to be. I think there's a huge difference from when I first started filming here. I still lived in the UK, but I first started shooting here in 2011. So what is that, 14 years ago? So I think the industry has moved on a huge amount in that time. And I think, it used to be not that many crew, not that many people, not that many really, really good people. And what we've got now is a much more developed industry, and a lot of that is down to DFI and all the work they do with interns and with people who want to work in the industry. So I think it's really grown, and there are still gaps or areas where there's not enough people doing a certain skill or a certain role, but it's kind of improving all the time. But it's very different to how it was when I first used to come over here. And I think DFI, it deserves a lot of credit, and I think so do all the production companies here, because they've all done their part of growing the industry and training people and developing it, and I think it's been really pivotal.
And for people who want to get into producing in Qatar, how do you think, or what do you think should be kind of the first steps that they embark on to kind of get there?
I think if you want to work if you ultimately want to become a producer, or you want to work in production, get as much exposure as you can to different sets. Go on shoots, volunteer, be an intern, just go to be a helping hand. Because if you go on lots of different shoots, they're all different. Every shoot's different, the creative's different, the team's different, producer, director's different, and there's always something to learn. I think, when it was me, let's call it 15 years ago, I watched producers. I was a production assistant or a production manager. I watched producers on set, and I looked at what they did, and I decided what I liked about what they did and what I didn't like. And I decided when I'm the producer and it's my chance to make these decisions, I like that, but I don't like that. And you kind of make your own version of the role. You can see things that you think, I don't want to be that type of person, or I do want to be that type of person. So the only way to get there is to have the experience. So I think exposure, get down on shoots, ask questions. It's about turning up, being helpful, not getting in the way, but asking people questions. And in my experience, most people here in the industry will spend a couple of minutes talking to an intern, talking to someone who is a student still or wants to break into the industry, and kind of giving them their advice, which I think is really nice. But you won't get any of that by sitting at home, and so get out there really. Yeah.
And at the Edge Picture Company, like here in Doha, do you guys offer kind of internships to people to kind of be able to kind of get that hands-on experience maybe in sets? And what do you think is significant about something like that?
I'm just trying to think really. I mean, we regularly have interns and people coming in. I like to keep internships quite short, because I think an intern should be observing and learning, but ultimately, if they're going to have a serious, have a responsibility, then they should be really a paid member of the team. So I tend to take on interns when we're recruiting, so that hopefully one of them can succeed and then want to take a permanent job, because with the amount of training and resource to be available to an intern, to talk them through stuff and all of that, it's great when they then want to stay, and you can give them a role and develop and keep going with the kind of development. We have people starting mainly as production assistants, and sometimes they start and they really want to be a producer one day, and sometimes they say, I don't know what I want. I think I want to be a director or an editor. but we try to kind of mold that journey for them. So if after 2 years or a year you say, you know what, I prefer camera work or I prefer editing work, we've got a way of moving people across, because you want to give people the opportunity to change their mind about what they want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with you when it comes to you saying that the industry has like grown so much in the past couple of years. Like even for me as someone like who's like a Gen Zer, like I've seen so many people in Qatar now, like, study media and comms and get to making films more than like even if I talked to my brother who's a millennial and I told him that, because it was his dream to study film, he wouldn't believe it. So I can imagine that maybe there's also a lot of like youth that are interested and that are actually like being on sets more often. And I do wonder if that's the case based on your experience. And if that is the case, how do you kind of persuade a client like about kind of trusting the fact that even if there are these like younger people that are on your crew, that it's still going to work out well? Because some people sometimes have their apprehensions.
I always like to involve the client with knowing who's on the set and what the different roles are, because often they're not entirely sure, and they're saying, who's that, what are they doing, and you're explaining. And I always think it's important to do that, because I understand that it can be a bit overwhelming for people the first time they're on a shoot, whether they're a client or an intern. But I've never struggled with anybody feeling like this person is too young or too inexperienced. It's always ultimately it's the producer's decision to take on and have people there to learn, and they take responsibility for them. So I've never really had anybody question it. Which
I think that's going to be quite motivating then for people who are gonna hear this. And I was going to ask you is that I'm sure that you guys have had interns over the past year or mentees, let's call them. Do you recall, maybe let's call it like a success story of someone you remember maybe came on like as a mentee or like an intern and now is doing some amazing work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't say who, but I have someone with us who started as an intern, was very keen, very enthusiastic, straight from university, and they didn't know how much they didn't know really about working in a production company, and they're still with us to this day. And I was at a pitch the other day, and I said to them, you pitch this creative. And I kind of threw them into the situation, and they did a really brilliant job, and I was able to watch them do it and, not have to do it myself, but watch them do it. And afterwards I said to them, I'm so proud of you. You've come on this huge journey, and now I'm watching you pitch at a really high level, absolutely as good as I could have done. And that's amazing, So I like to make people aware and feel appreciated, because I'm impressed, and I really like being impressed by my own team. It's really fulfilling. Yeah.
On the topic of the pitch, because I remember you mentioned earlier that the production or the producer's role varies depending on whether you're working on film or you're working on commercials. And I'm just curious to know, because I'm sure like you probably have to pitch for commercials. Maybe I don't know if you would pitch also for films, but you pitch for commercials. So how does the production process look like, or the producer's role look like for something like a commercial versus like a film?
The extra layer when it's a commercial is you have an agency, you have a client, everyone's under pressure for this film, this short TVC to be a success. It's always got to be done in a reasonably tight time frame, and the producer needs to get the result, get to the finishing line, get the film over the line, everyone be happy with it, and for it to be as great as it can be, and to do what it needs to do. Ultimately, every film, every commercial has a message and has a purpose. So the difference, I think the biggest difference between working like that and working on a short film, for example, is when you work on a short film, the lead creative people, the director, and you don't have agency, you don't have client, you often have a little bit more time. You have more time for opinions and thoughts and a little bit more creative time and less pressure to, it just there's kind of less pressure in a certain way. But in another way, there's also more work to do because, especially working with first time or second time directors, there's a lot, you have to go through processes in a very detailed way and give them lots of opportunity to think and, really work out what they want. So on a commercial, directors having to make decisions really quickly and, have they got the take? Have we got it? Should we get it again? Okay, done. Whereas on a short, you might do it lots of times and have that kind of little bit more luxury to spend time, I suppose. I mean, that's one of the differences.
Yeah. Out of the whole entire process, I think maybe for me, the thing that's easiest to resonate with is the briefing part, because I work in marketing. And so for me, when we have like an end user or something, the most important thing always for me is the brief, because you kind of want to suck the most out of it. So does the producer also do that in the briefing stage? Is it also the responsibility of the producer to try and understand the brief completely, even if it means going back and forth with the client?
I think so, because ultimately you've got to fully understand the brief to be able to deliver the film. And I think it's really important to ask all the questions and to go back and forth as much as you can to make sure that you understand what they want and what they want it to do so that you can deliver that. That part of the pre-production process, or even before pre-production, is really, really key, because you can't produce a film if you don't quite understand what it's for or what it needs to do. So, and it's really important not just the producer to understand it, but the director and the team to really know, what are we trying to do here? What do we need to get from this? What does it need to say? I think it's pretty vital.
What resources do you think emerging filmmakers still lack at the current moment that maybe in due time can be something that is more available to them?
If you'd asked me that question 2 years ago, I'd have said there's a lack of studios and sound stages here. But in the last 2 years, lots of people have built studios. And so that's a great resource for people from, filmmakers with their short films to production companies with their commercials. I think while things have really improved over the years and there's a lot more people and technicians and creative crew and resources, there could always be more. And I think in time it will become easier. But to be really honest, I think that there's not a lot missing at this point.
I think that makes me feel very fortunate and very happy, and I feel like over the years there has been such a positive investment into this industry. So I definitely agree. And the topic of emerging filmmakers or emerging producers, what do you think differentiates a good producer from a great producer?
I think that ultimately great producing comes with experience. So I think that a lot of it is just how long you've been doing it for and how varied what you've been doing is, because you might have someone who's been producing for years, but they're doing the same type of thing over and over. Variety of experience, exposure to different creative, different crew, different directors, all helps in the path to becoming great as a producer. And I think also, in my journey to becoming a producer, I remember, I produced a film and I went to a screening and someone said to me, someone not in the industry said, "Oh, I see, you're the producer, but the director's name comes there. Is that the next step up for you, to be the director?" I said, No. I don't want to be the director. That's a completely different role, and it's not what I would want at all. And I explained, what the director does and what the producer does to this friend. And I think that, you've got all sorts of producers out there. Some direct, some do this, some do that. But I think personally, I've been doing it for a number of years, and I've honed my skill, I think. Like, I know, I always, after every production, even now, I look at myself and I go, what could I have done better? What could I have done about that or that? What could have made it smoother? And I always reflect on myself and what I could have done differently. And I think that that's really important for everyone to do, and no one should just think, oh, I've made it. I'm as good as I could be, because there's always more to learn. And I think you should always challenge yourself to do better, and be really proud of the role and what you can achieve in the role. So I think all those things really go towards it. We talked before about, ambitions and so on. I think that I always want to put as much as I can on the screen, push for the creative, push for the audience. And I think that differentiates a bit maybe between good and great. And, I don't accept from people when they go, oh, that'll do, it'll be fine. You think, well, no, what could be better? What could be, how do we take it up a notch?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
What would you say are the do's and don'ts of producing?
Don't assume you know everything. Do the research. Appreciate your team. It's a team that makes a film. It's not just one person. It's not just the director. It's not just the producer. The person handing out the bottles of water is as important, because if they're not doing that, no one's hydrated or whatever it is. So I think humility, matters, and just valuing your team and just doing the best you can in that way. Yeah, allow yourself as much time as possible.
I really do love that. I mean, young filmmakers or emerging filmmakers at times sometimes have zero budget to really do anything. And I think that can be quite intimidating, maybe to start off with. And I'd love to know from you, what would be your advice for people who are wanting to make films but maybe have to produce them on zero budget?
I think the key thing is they need to find other people that want to make films and also don't have any budget. Because and it can be easier if you're a student studying film, because you have colleagues that you're at university or college with who want to achieve the same thing. But if you've written a script and you want to direct a film, get your friends to help you. And then in turn you help them on theirs. They need a helping hand. Share that that experience, and because as a group you can find amazing ways to make things happen. And a little bit of tenacity, if you don't ask for something, you'll never get it. So it's worth calling that location and saying, look, I'm trying to make a film about this, this, and this. I have no budget. I'm a student, or I'm a this. And people are generally kind and helpful, and surprisingly so. So I think if you don't ask, you don't get. So it doesn't hurt, to ask a favor. And I think with sometimes, in the early days, you're struggling to fill a role on a shoot. You don't have a cameraman, or you don't have, build the relationships, and then, you get a favor, but then you can do the favor later on. So you have to be careful with this, because if you do it too much and you pull too many favors, you can, I know people who've ended up with very bad reputations because they're always taking and not giving. So it's a balance.
And would you say it's necessary for someone to study film to get into producing films?
No, not at all. I don't know if that's not the right answer, but at the Edge in London, we have people, really experienced producers, senior producers, who went to university and did engineering or chemistry or completely different subjects that have got nothing to do with film and nothing creative. And they've done their degree and then realized, actually, I don't want to be a chemist or an engineer. I want to work in the industry. And so I don't think it's vital at all. Now, I know in Qatar, a lot of people feel that they should work in what they studied. But for me, it's not it's absolutely not vital. I also think that, and this might be also not the right thing to say, but you don't need to study at all. You know, I've got great colleagues in the UK and all over the world who are brilliant at what they do, and they have not been to university at all. So, but it's all about a little bit tenacity again, you know?
On the topic of tenacity, if I was to tell you to give me 5 key skills or traits that a producer must have, what would you say they would be?
Common sense, vital. A bit of a thick skin, being able to be robust, enthusiastic for what they're trying to do. That's 3. I think it's important to offer certainty. So while you need to think about the decisions you make, the director and the crew around you need reinforcement. They need certainty. And I think, so that's number 4. The 5th one, what have I got there? Enthusiasm, maybe? It's a little bit like what I said, but yeah.
I mean, the 5th one could be tenacity.
Yeah, it could be. There you go. Yeah. Common sense, though. Like, really, if you don't have common sense, it's going to be a very tough journey to be a producer.
Makes me laugh. Do you have any recommendations for maybe courses or books or podcasts or videos for people who want to start kind of exploring the realm of producing or filmmaking in general that you think people should maybe check out?
They could start with this podcast. I mean, this series you're doing is great. I mean, I said it at the beginning, but I think there's a lot of really great episodes. I mean, I've not seen all of them, but it's a good place to start. I think the most important thing in a way is watching as many films as they can. You know, watch films from the beginning of cinema to the present day. Watch world cinema, watch films from different countries, different eras. Just spend a lot of time watching and looking and restudying what you're looking at. And then, you know, if you want to work in commercials or, you know, watch commercials, you know, and look and really study it. I think a lot of it is what you see. Maybe, I mean, I've read a lot of books. I studied film. I've read a lot of books, but nothing jumps to mind as the great thing to read. But I think exposure, you know, and I think there are quite a lot of, interviews with filmmakers, you know, newspaper interviews, magazine interviews, radio. I find it fascinating listening to interviews with, you know, world-renowned directors and producers. And I'm, you know, coming to Qumrah and listening to the masters. It's so enlightening. And I think anyone who wants to work in the industry, whatever role, should be doing all of that, you know. Mm. And I also think it's not just film. It's, if you're a creative person and you think you want to work in the industry and be a producer or a director, whatever it is, it's not just films. Go to art galleries, go to museums, look at paintings, you know, expose yourself to, you know, culture as well. Because it all goes into inspiring you.
And if you were going to go back to Poppy in university and you were going to advise her something about, or give her a piece of advice for the journey ahead to becoming a producer, what advice would you give her?
It's an interesting one. I had a look not that long ago at some of my student films, which were more than 20 years ago, and they really weren't very good. So most of them are still on VHS. I did this, but I would say to others, you've got to sort of be prepared to start at the bottom of the ladder, at the bottom rung, and work your way up. And whether that's producing or directing or camera or lighting or art, you know, watch and learn from other people, and don't think, oh, just because I studied the subject, I then have got an entry level, you know, I'm then entering the industry at a certain level. Be prepared to be prepared to be the person that, that's doing the teas and coffees, and then ask questions and learn from the people you work with. I go up to this Northwestern and speak to students and talk about various things. And I think they should not be too worried about going straight out of university and getting a job in the industry. It's hard to do that. And it's not a bad thing to work in different fields and have your first years of employment doing slightly different things than maybe what your ambition is, because you learn about how to work with people and you make mistakes, but you're making them maybe not in front of the industry people. So I think give yourself a bit of time, maybe.
I think a lot of times you have to really be kind of patient. And I think it's kind of that level of enthusiasm that you were kind of talking about in terms of the key traits that maybe got you to where you are today. And on the topic of enthusiasm, if we're going to think of Qatar's industry by 2030, how do you feel like it's going to change? Like, where do you see it going?
I'm really excited about the next, 2030 is 5 years? It's not very long.
I know.
I'm really excited by quite a lot of possibilities. I mean, I'm developing a feature with Noor Al Nasser, who directed Sanad, the film I produced 2023. And, very excited about the next steps for that production, and very excited about all of the different, features in development that different people have and are working on. And I think that the industry is kind of blooming, really. I think it's better and better and better and better, supported by DFI, supported by different production companies and different people. And I think I'm quite excited as to what we'll be looking at and watching and what screenings we'll be going to in 5 years' time. I think it's really, really grown as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I can't honestly wait to see it bloom even more for the next 5 years. I can't believe 2030 is only 5 years away. Is there a particular production or producer moment that when you look through the 20 years of experience that you've had that really, really stands out to you? Whether that be because you solved something that you didn't expect you were going to solve, or like it's just like a moment where you were like, yeah, this is it.
I think it's probably those moments where you overcome difficult challenges. And I think, quite a lot of years ago, I mean, maybe thinking for a second, maybe let's call it 12 years ago, I was filming a project. It was a documentary film, and I had to film it. I was based out of the UK, but I had to go to several countries to film it, including in the US and Singapore and Indonesia and Germany and Romania, I think. So a number of countries. And we were filming in Germany. We had 4 shoot days in 3 different cities. And we had, obviously, call sheet, plan, film in this city, drive to the next place, and so on. But we'd been waiting for this ship to dock in Norway, and no one had been able to tell us when it was arriving. And so we hadn't been able to plan for it or schedule it, but we knew it might happen. So we're in the middle of Germany, and the phone rings, and it's the client, and they say, right, yeah, the ship is in Bergen, in Norway. You need to go there now. And I had to wrap what we were doing at that exact moment, get onto a travel agent, reroute the entire, book everyone tickets to Norway, figure out where the nearest airport was to where we were, get everyone to pack their stuff up in the hotel, get everything de-rigged. I had to bring in a couple of extra crew members for what we needed to do in Norway. I phoned them, said, look, I'll explain later. Are you free? Great. Have you got your kit? Great. How much is it going to cost? Great. Here's your plane ticket. Go to the airport. And we all just, from all over the place, flew to Bergen. And we got there to the hotel, and we were in Germany. It was kind of spring-like weather, and in Norway it was really cold. We didn't have the right clothes. And we turned up and at this hotel, and all the different people who had flown in were there. It's like, they were like, Poppy, what are we doing? I was like, right, I'll tell you now. And we sat down at 1 a.m. and talked about what we were going to do, which was going to film this ship. And we had this helicopter. We're going to do helicopter filming of the ship. And it's kind of exciting, you know. It was like our week changed, our plans changed. And that's a moment where you think, yeah, I know, I kind of pulled that off. And also, you know, dealt with the unexpected and made it work. And here we are in Norway doing something unplanned, and it's kind of exciting, you know.
I mean, Poppy, you have given, I think, the best well-rounded explanation for what a producer does, and I think have given kind of like a platform for people to feel motivated to pursue something like this. And for people who are trying to pursue that, I think you've just given them an extra like push of motivation. So I want to thank you so much for all the wisdom you've, you know, bestowed upon us today. And yeah, just I really, really appreciate all of your insights about producing, and I wish you the best of luck, and I'm excited to see the industry bloom as you think.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having me, and it's been a really enjoyable evening. So thank you. Thanks for the questions.